How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you guys are new here, do me a huge favor, go down and subscribe before we get into this video. Wisconsin has not been having the best of time lately. It's been extremely cold. Today's not too bad, but I haven't seen the sun in like 4 days now. And by not that cold today, I mean it's currently 44 degrees outside, so that's not cold. Today we're going to be talking about the Mustang. The Mustang is a very introductory sports car, especially for some people who are, 18, 19 years old, kind of like I was, looking to get a car, and you see a very affordable price point of about $30,000 to $40,000 where you can buy a car. Of course, when you're 16, 17, you're most likely not looking for one of these cars. Of course, my first car wasn't my Mustang, but there's a lot of different trims out there for Mustangs, and there's a lot of different years out there, and I would say there's a Mustang for nearly every single price point. You can buy a Mustang for $5,000, or you could buy a Mustang for $1 million. I'm going to be talking about the S550 platform mainly because that's what I own, that's what I have the most experience with, but I'll touch upon the others as well because again, as a high schooler, you're most likely not going to go after a $40,000 car, and you're going to be wanting to get something, in the $5,000 price point. But just because you can afford it, there are a lot of other things that you should consider before you buy one. But let's hop in the car, give it a little startup, pull it out of the garage, and take it out, and kind of talk about whether or not it's a good idea for you to get in as your very first car, a Mustang. Cold startup. I've actually been daily driving my Mustang again. I mean, I bought this originally as my daily driver, and then I kind of stopped driving it and started driving, some of the other cars that I own. But last like 3-4 days, or even like the last week or so, I've been driving this car on a consistent daily basis, and it kind of reminds me of the time I used to drive it like every single day for like a year long. These cars are really tempting. When I was originally looking for a car, I wasn't anticipating on buying a Mustang. I was going for a sedan or a hatch or something along that extent because it's a little bit more practical. But here's the reason I chose the Mustang. This was not my first car at all. This is probably like 4th or 5th car down the line that I've owned, and it's definitely not my first sports car or anything into the sports car realm either. I had 2 before this. So let's talk about the S550 platform just to start off, because that's what I own, that's what I have the most experience with, and that's what I know. This car in the 5.0 makes 460 horsepower or 480 horsepower depending on what variant you get. That is a lot of power, but this car is also a 2019, 2018. The S550 came out in 2015. Those cars made 450 horsepower or 440 horsepower. And obviously, if you're going to be getting your first car, you're probably going to be daily driving the Mustang as well. So I will say, from a daily driver perspective, this car is phenomenal. If you're not hauling a bunch of people, most likely, again, if it's your first car, and let's say you are 17 or 16 or, a little bit younger like I am, you're not going to be hauling people around, and you're not going to really have that kind of responsibility. So it's okay for you to get a car that only has realistically 2 seats. The car is not made to haul people, and you're aware of that, and you know that when you're buying the car. From a daily driver's perspective, this car is awesome. This car cruises on the highway, absolutely no issue. My exhaust is a little bit louder than stock would be, but still, it's very livable in here. And this car honestly is very controllable for how much horsepower it is. Of course, if we do drop a gear, drop another gear, and let it have some throttle, it definitely sings and it definitely wants to go, and you can feel the horsepower, but it's still very, very controllable. Now, from someone who hasn't had experience behind the wheel of a car, and someone who, doesn't really know how to drive the basics on the road, it might be a little too much. This car's blind spots aren't too bad. It has decent visibility, and of course you get used to that. But for someone new, it might be a little too much. Honestly, if you've never driven a car before and you think the very first car you're going to learn on, the very first thing you're going to step into is a Mustang, I think it'd be better to learn on a car for a year and a half before you step into any type of sports car, especially one with over 400 horsepower. I think me as a 16-year-old, I could have handled the car. I could have driven it pretty well, even, with that 6-month temporary license. After that, I got my full license. If I was handed the keys to this car, and let's say I know how to drive manual, I could handle it, but I'd still be terrified. 400 horsepower plus sports car is not the most friendly car to someone who doesn't know the basics of driving a car on the road. But let's say you're someone who is like me, looking to buy your first car, and you're like 19 years old, 18 years old, and you have some experience on the road, but you never bought a car on your own. You want to step into a sports car, you think you can be responsible, keeping in mind I'm not talking about insurance prices. As far as like how controllable this thing is, when I was 18, sure, I had a little bit of experience with driving some sports cars for about a year and a half or so. I drove this car in the snow on a daily basis from January to like March, April, all the way through the year, all the way through the next year. In Wisconsin winters, when it snows, it rains, it does everything. I handled the car perfectly fine because I knew the limitations of the car, and I knew pretty easily how much control I would need in order to drive the car. And on top of that, the stability control, the traction control are very, very good in the car. So I think if you have a little bit of driving experience, 1-2 years, and you're looking to get yourself your first car, but you don't know if this is too much to handle, I honestly don't think it is. These cars on paper have a lot of horsepower, and they're really fast, and you might like really, really want one, and you're like, but I don't know if I can handle it. I don't know if it's the smart decision for me to get in the car, because I'm afraid that I might crash, I might lose control, I might do all of these things. As long as you're responsible with the car, again, even as a 16-year-old, if you're responsible with the car, it's not going to do anything you don't tell it to do. This car is made to stay on the road, and it does a really, really good job at that. Now, going to a little bit of the older generations of the cars. The older gens had solid rear axles. The older cars were a little bit less predictable. The older cars are a little harder to drive. The older cars have a little bit less horsepower. Let's say you're looking at maybe a Fox body, you're looking at a new gen, and you're 16 again. I would still say you probably want a couple months of experience just so you know the roads a little bit. A couple months isn't a lot of time, but it's enough time to give a feeling of the road before you hop into a car where the visibility is extremely limited. At the end of the day, it's your decision whether you're going to buy it or not. But I think as long as you have a good understanding of how the roads work and basics of how to drive, these cars aren't going to be super uncontrollable. I absolutely love my Mustang. It's probably one of my favorite cars I've ever owned, and the motor is awesome. If you're looking to buy an EcoBoost, I never even mentioned the V6 or the EcoBoost just because that's not really my forte. I've never owned one. I've never driven an EcoBoost. I've never experienced one. But from my understanding, it's just a slower version of this car. And my point still stands in terms of the visibility. You're going to be a little intimidated when you step onto a road regardless of what car you're driving. I think it'd just be smarter to hop in a car that's a little bit more new driver friendly than a car that's made to go very fast and have a lot of horsepower. But it's a Mustang, and it sounds like this when you step on the gas. This car is so much fun. But if you did enjoy this video, please do me a huge favor and leave a like on it. Subscribe to the channel because there's a lot of fun videos to come. With all of that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.